You know that quiet, active confession? Well, believe it or not, it wasn't always so private. It actually has this incredibly public and frankly dramatic history. So let's get into it. Let's trace the amazing journey of how we say, I'm sorry.
So that's really the big question we're tackling here. How do we go from this huge public drama to a private whisper? We're about to go on a trip through time, starting with ancient community rituals, then looking at this wild idea of a spiritual price list for every sin, and finally landing on the private practice that's familiar to so many of us today.
All right, let's kick things off. Our story starts way back in ancient Israel. And you've got to understand, back then, sin and forgiveness, that was a total community affair. It wasn't just about you and your relationship with God. It was about everybody's. And that right there is the key. Think of it like this. A sin wasn't just a personal mistake. It was like a tear in the very fabric of the community. So if one person messed up, it affected everyone. And that meant healing or atonement had to be a group project. It was all about mending that community bond with God together. Okay, and this is where it gets super visual. The biggest ritual of all was the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. Picture this. The high priest stands up and confesses the sins of the entire nation. Then, they bring out a goat, the scapegoat, and symbolically place all those sins onto it. And then, they send that goat out into the wilderness to literally carry the sins away. I mean, talk about a powerful public spectacle of shared forgiveness.
Okay, now let's jump forward in time, a big jump. We're in the early Middle Ages, and some Celtic and Anglo-Saxon monks are about to introduce something totally revolutionary.
So what they came up with was called tariffed penance. And the idea was, well, it was a game changer. For every single sin you could think of, there was a specific pre-assigned penance. It was like a price list for wrongdoing. This was a massive shift from the old ways, which were way more general.
And here's why this was so huge. The old, ancient public penance, it was often so intense that you could pretty much only do it once in your entire life. But this new system, you could do it again and again. You confess, you do your penance, and you're good to go until next time. And maybe the biggest deal of all, it was private, just you and a confessor.
And check this out. This is an actual page from one of those books. They were called penitential books. You can really think of them as guidebooks for priests, or I love this description, sentencing guidelines for the soul. They literally laid out the entire system.
So let's break down what was actually in these books. You can see just how specific they got. Committing a homicide? That could get you anywhere from 3 to 10 years of penance, a lot of it on just bread and water. Theft? You had to make restitution and fast for weeks. It was this incredibly detailed, almost legalistic system for getting your soul right.
But don't think that public forgiveness was completely gone. Oh no. For the really, really big sins, the church in the High Middle Ages cooked up something incredibly theatrical.
Right. This was called solemn penance, and it was reserved for stuff that shocked the whole community. Think murder or heresy. See, it wasn't just about one person's soul anymore. It was about putting things right for everyone, publicly, and showing what happens when you commit a really serious sin.
So how did this whole thing go down? Just imagine this for a second. It's Ash Wednesday. You were brought up in front of everyone, formally accused, and then you were symbolically and sometimes literally cast out of the church. You spend the entire season of Lent in public prayer and fasting. It's only on Maundy Thursday, right before Easter, that you're finally welcomed back. I mean, it was pure spiritual theater.
Okay, so let's recap. We've seen these big public rituals for the whole community, and then these dramatic public rituals for really big sins. But everything, and I mean everything, was about to change. A quiet revolution was coming, one that would turn confession into the private act that we're familiar with today.
And the whole story hinges on one single year, 1215. Remember that date. This is the moment when the entire world of public penance starts to disappear and a brand new, totally revolutionary rule takes its place.
This right here, this was the game changer. The Fourth Lateran Council declared that every single faithful Christian had to confess all their sins to their priest at least once a year. Think about that. Confession went from being this rare public thing for huge sins to a regular, private, and universal requirement for everyone.
So you have to ask, why the big change? Well, a few reasons. For starters, those big public shows were just getting impractical and hard to pull off. At the same time, there was this growing focus on a person's individual conscience. And on a practical level, this was a way for the church to connect with and guide every single person every single year. It was a huge pastoral move.
So that mandate from 1215 really set the stage for the confession we know today. The last piece of the puzzle was just to formalize it all and really seal the deal on its private nature.
And this chart, wow, this really lays out the whole journey, doesn't it? Just look at the difference. We went from public and theatrical to private and secret, from a once-in-a-lifetime thing to at least once a year. The focus shifted from the community to the individual, and it went from covering just huge public scandals to all sins, great and small.
What a transformation.
And in the end, it all comes down to these words. This is the formula of absolution, spoken quietly, one-on-one. This is the final destination of that long winding road, a personal promise of forgiveness that started as a massive public ritual thousands of years ago. And so, that leaves us with one last big question to think about. What really changes when seeking forgiveness moves from the public square into the private heart? What does that do to a society, to an individual? It's a huge shift, and it has absolutely shaped how we think about sin, guilt, and grace to this very day.